What is UFC? Can one watch UFC? Can one train UFC? Can one eat UFC? UFC stands for Ultimate Fighting Championship, and it's the premier league for the sport of MMA. Now, if you're confused between the terms MMA and UFC, just tell yourself that UFC is the organization or company that promotes the sport of MMA. So this were an SAT prompt, for example. You might see something like UFC is to MMA as NBA is to basketball. Because people play basketball in hopes of one day playing in the NBA, and people train MMA with the dream of one day fighting in the UFC. If you ever meet somebody that says they trained UFC, good chance they're either new to the sport or they're just flat out lying to you. Now, the company UFC, it's actually a rather new company. It's only a few decades old. Rather than going into depth with the history of the company, I've chosen 3 key milestones that will help you understand the growth of the company and the history of the UFC. Who would win in a fight? A boxer or a wrestler? Now, this type of question has been frequently debated in martial arts circles, and it's just the core question of who would win in a fight. And you actually don't even need to be in the MMA circle to be debating this, or any martial arts circle. It's just something that every single person has asked at one point in their life. Who would win in a fight? Who would win in a fight? Superman or Batman? Who would win in a fight? Kendall Jenner or Kylie Jenner? Who would win in a fight? A bear or a dolphin? Now, this is an age-old question that people have asked since the beginning of time. Who would win in a fight? If you were to ask my opinion, it's pretty simple. A bear, because a dolphin's basically just an oversized salmon. Kendall Jenner, because she's an older Jenner, better reach as well. And of course, Superman, because Batman doesn't even have a superpower. You could just shoot him in the mouth. He has no protection right there. But what do I know? But when it comes to martial art versus martial art, people have always wanted to know which was the most effective martial art to use. And it's very, very hard to get to the bottom of, because each martial art has its own rules, its own boundaries, whether you can kick, whether you can punch, whether you can grapple. And the only way to really get to the bottom of it is if you were to have a no-holds-barred contest. Well, in the early 1990s, this is actually what 2 guys did. Art Davies and Rory Gracie. Yes, from that Gracie family. They organized the first ever UFC event, Ultimate Fighting Championship. It was an 8-man no-holds-barred tournament, and each fighter had their own discipline. You had a karate guy, you had a savate guy, you had a kickboxer, you even had a sumo guy. And it was very, very reminiscent of these old school video games like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. Now, when the first fight happened, it only lasted about 20-30 seconds after somebody had their tooth kicked in across the cage into the audience, and it was over. And it was that point that people realized this fighting was nothing like the video games. It was nothing like the fighting you saw in movies. It was a lot more real, it was a lot more raw, and it was a lot more exciting. And at the end of the event, half the fighters left in an ambulance. But many more people left the arena hooked in this idea of ultimate fighting. If you weren't one of the 8,000 people that attended the arena in Denver, Colorado, you could have bought this live on pay-per-view for $14.95. That's cheaper than going out with your friends, getting drunk, and waiting for somebody to find a mailbox. The pay-per-view was considered highly, highly successful, selling about 80,000 pay-per-views. And that was enough for them to do another UFC, and another one, and another one, and another one. 10 years later, it's the early 2000s, and UFC is a little bit more legit. There's more rules, more restrictions, more regulation, and the fighters, they're also a little bit more sophisticated. They're not depending on just one discipline. They're starting to mix different techniques to be more effective fighters and athletes. When it comes to the ownership of the UFC, Art Davies, Rory, and Gracie sold the UFC for $2 million to the Fertitta brothers, who are Las Vegas businessmen who own casinos, and they put their childhood friend Dana White as president of the UFC. And this is a really cool time because at this point, there's only been about 50 UFC events, and if you wanted to watch UFC, you'd have to watch it either on pay-per-view. If you were lucky enough or had a friend that had a DVD or VHS, you could watch it there, but around the early 2000s, the UFC started venturing more into cable television. They had this reality show, for example, called The Ultimate Fighter, and it had a bunch of guys living in a house together, and they would fight for a six-figure UFC contract. And it actually is as awesome as it sounds. You know, when you have a bunch of grown men living in a house together, getting drunk, arguing, fighting, and then waking up the next morning just to argue and fight again in a cage, it was pretty awesome. The finalists of the competition would fight on live cable television, and you had two fighters who made it to the finals. You had Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar. Now, Stephan Bonnar, his nickname was the American Psycho, because he literally looked like he worked for a hedge fund, and he was one or two lines of coke away from just murdering everyone in the office. And then you had Forrest Griffin, who looked like a nice guy, but to give you an idea of him, his last fight before joining the competition, he broke his arm, so he won by knocking the guy out using his other arm. You couldn't have chosen two better lunatics for this finale. So round one starts, and they come out swinging. They're throwing every punch, every kick. They're fighting like they do not want to go back to their day job ever. Round two starts, once again, they're swinging, they're banging, they're throwing everything but the kitchen sink. And round three, same old story. They're going right back at it to the point where they're fighting until they collapse. It was an amazing fight. The reason why this fight's so important to UFC is this fight is one of the reasons many people got into the UFC. If you were to track the number of people watching the live event as it was happening, as round one, to round two, to round three was happening, they saw that spike in viewership, which literally meant that people were calling each other up saying, "Hey, dude, you gotta turn on your TV, man. These two guys on live television are beating the crap out of each other." Now, if you jump another 10 years to 2016, you have Endeavor talking to the UFC about buying the UFC. If you don't know what Endeavor is, it's one of the top talent and media agencies in the world. They represent writers, directors, athletes, brands. If you're old school enough to know the TV show Entourage on HBO, there's a character named Ari Gold, and he's a talent agent that closes deals, but he throws phone books, yells at his assistant, all that jazz. That character, Ari Gold, was modeled after Ari Emanuel, who's actually the CEO of Endeavor. Endeavor ended up buying the UFC for $4 billion. Yes, billion with a B. Only 10 years ago, the UFC was being sold for $2 million, and now it's being sold for $4 billion. It's outrageous growth for any sort of company. This is why people say the UFC and the sport of MMA is the fastest growing sport. Endeavor was a perfect company to buy the UFC because of all the relationships they have in the entertainment and media space with all the studios, distributors, all the executives within the entertainment industry. And it proved very, very fortuitous. In 2018, the UFC made a deal with ESPN for all their US media rights. So now you have the UFC and the sport of MMA on the main stage with all these other sports like the NBA, the NFL, NHL. Now, if you want a better testament of how successful the UFC has been, just take a look at my boy Dana White. He went from skinny with some hair to jacked with no hair. Now, I'm starting to see a trend here with really, really rich people. I guess you have to be bald or something, or at least you have to be really jacked. I mean, you take Jeff Bezos, for example. Skinny with some hair, now jacked with no hair. I know what you're thinking, there's Elon Musk, but my argument, he's jacked, has some hair, he's just not in his final form yet. But the moral of the story here is that it doesn't really matter if you are jacked or not. It doesn't matter if you have hair or not. It doesn't even matter if you have money. What matters is happiness. And money, yes, you could buy a yacht, but can you buy happiness? Actually, he looks kind of happy in that yacht.